Hello, welcome to iFanboy Booksplode, episode 67, Legends. My name is Conor Kilpatrick, and I'm here with Josh Flanagan.
Hello, friends.
And we are talking about Legends. This is our monthly Booksplode show, unlocked by the patrons at patreon.com/iFanboy. It alternates with Josh's Talksplode show every other month. This is the month we talk about a graphic novel or collected edition or some other comic that's not a single issue, and we chose this month to discuss Legends. We looked at the 30th anniversary edition. It doesn't really matter which edition you look at. So let's get into it. Spoilers for this much more than 30-year-old comic book. I think it's 40 something years.
It'll be I think it said 86, so it's right. So we're
39 years.
Yeah.
Legend. Okay, before we get into what this book was, Josh, did you ever read this when you were young or
I did not. I did not know it existed. I was unaware of it in any way until you told me about it and I read it.
Okay, so I read Legends in issues. Not when it came out. It came out at the end of '86, so like right after Crisis on Infinite Earths ended, and it went into early '87. I didn't read it when it was coming out because I wasn't going to the comic store quite yet at that time. I would have been 9, and but it was probably a year later when I was going. Not every week. I didn't start going every week until I think I was 12, but I would go get back issues, and I had heard about Legends. If you were reading comics at all regularly, Legends was something that was peppered throughout or referred to, and you'd see it back issues. So I started to pick it up. I did, in a great way you did as a kid. And the same thing happened with Crisis. I read it completely out of order. I read whatever issue I could get my hands on for whatever was affordable. So I definitely read issue 2 first because 2 had Batman on the cover. And then I definitely read issue 4 next. That's the one where all the heads are on fire. Again, because Batman was on the cover. I think I read 2, 4, 5 first. Pretty sure that was the order they went in. And then I filled in because 1 was expensive, as all ones were. But I eventually filled it in and read it. The same thing happened with Crisis. I read that completely out of order. And it was fine because that's what you did as a kid. You filled it in. You filled in the holes. So what was the series? This series was DC nakedly saying we want to do a sequel to Crisis on Infinite Earths because it was so popular. They reached out to the editor, and he got John Ostrander, who at the time hadn't done any DC work, to plot it. He got Wein to script it, and he got John Byrne to draw it. And they did it Marvel style. So Ostrander plotted it, Byrne drew it, and then Lean did the dialogue. This was
I can see that.
This was Byrne's second major DC work. He had spent his whole career almost at Marvel. Then he did Man of Steel, the miniseries that brought Superman into the modern age post-Crisis. He did Untold Tales of Batman. I think that was a long issue, and so this was his second time doing.
So this would have been DC. After Man of Steel.
Yeah,
which is interesting because it seemed like seemed pretty soon after. So we managed to wedge that other one in there also because I was 86. I was like, this is like prime John Byrne era. I mean,
yeah. Well, this book and Man of Steel, and he was doing Superman. After this book, he did Superman and he did Action, or was it Adventure Superman? He did 2 Superman books. And he drew them both. This and then reading his other X-Men and Avenger stuff really cemented him as my favorite artist at the time, basically all through high school until we get to more modern stuff. But this is like prime time John Byrne. This book, we'll talk about it in a bit, really cements him as being the heir to Kirby, the sort of modern heir to Kirby. But so the point of this book was to do a second crossover, and this wasn't just 6 issues. There was 31 total tie-in issues, and they actually were numbered. It was a novel thing to do, was that the banner across the top that said Legends also gave you what part it was, so you could read the crossover in the order it was supposed to be read. And this book was tasked with sort of launching the modern DC universe post-Crisis. So out of this book comes the Justice League title that Keith Giffen and J.M. DeMatteis do. Out of this book comes Mike Barron's Wally West Flash book, which eventually becomes Mark Waid and Jeff Johns' Flash book. Out of this comes the Suicide Squad book that John Ostrander writes. they're introduced in this miniseries.
It's the first appearance of Wonder Woman.
The first modern. Well, no, they introduced her in her own book.
Mhm.
The intention originally was she was going to be through this whole story, and Karen Berger, who at the time was the editor of Wonder Woman, said, "No, we want to set her up in her own book first." And so that was the book that Perez wrote and drew, and so they gave her a couple of issues there before she shows up right at the very tail end of the story. But this was sort of the modern introduction to a lot of like, what is DC like post-crisis? This is where you found it in Legends. And what's interesting, I think, stylistically, is that it's still very much a Bronze Age comic. It wasn't like a flip was switched, or a switch was flipped after Crisis, and things were suddenly modern. It took a while for styles to change. This is still totally a Bronze Age story, and so I loved it as a kid. Josh, what did you think about it?
So, coming into this sight unseen, I wanna enjoy the thing. And there were things about it I definitely enjoyed, but there were parts of it where I just think that the style held it back. In that, like the plot of it, the story, what happens, the sort of approach of the basic the basic plot is that Darkseid is antsy back on Apocalypse, and he's like, how do I get to that Earth? That really sticks in my craw. And the Desaad's like, I have an idea, which is probably basically your idea, because I'll give you credit for it, because he's sniveling. And he's like, you wanna make the people of Earth not believe in their heroes anymore. And so he sends some of his minions
He sends Glorious Godfrey, who is
G. Godfrey. What is it?
G. Gordon Godfrey.
G. Gordon.
He uses his powers of manipulation to manipulate the populace into becoming anti-hero.
So it's a demagoguery thing. I will say there were certain elements of this that I was like, this is all pretty familiar right now in the world. So there was sort of relevant stuff social stuff that I didn't quite expect.
Right.
So there's that, and then like a couple of I don't like the plotting of it. I thought was really kind of smart, because so there's several elements. There's Godfrey, and then there's a big burning, I think he's called Brimstone.
Yep.
And I can't remember what was his deal. Why did he make the people turn against the heroes?
Well, Godfrey did it.
Godfrey did it by right, but then the other one who was like the Mac. If I look through, it's going to take me too long. But
well, they just caused disasters that the heroes were involved in. But it was Godfrey's power.
With the first one, Shazam showed up, and he decided that what he would do was to call. Right, they got me. Okay, they changed the name. He decided that he would call out the word, and then the lightning would come. But they had set it up so when the lightning came, it burned the bad guy alive, the supervillain alive, and then people were like, how could you do that to that supervillain? So then they turned on him. So the whole thing was like that. And I thought that was smart and interesting. I liked looking at every possible frame of this. But there was a certain point where it was like, there's a lot of words that don't need to be here, and it felt a little sluggish through there. And it's not necessarily a bad thing all the time, but sometimes it feels like a little difficult. I think maybe part of me was like, maybe this should have been more modern at this point, but they were still working out, how they wanted to be.
The same year. I mean, it doesn't happen that quickly.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. Right, but if I when we read Man of Steel, I was like, this is perfect. It was fun. You had to sort of adjust to a very different type of DC. And it's kind of in my mind, I think post-crisis is, newer, but it's not there yet, because we read 90 Superman on here and talked about it.
Yeah.
I had fun reading it. I think it could have moved a little faster for me. There was a little bit of stuck in the mud in the middle. But that
I don't think
comics.
I don't think we get super modern until we get to JLA in 95 or 6, whatever that was, 96,
97.
Yeah, I don't think we really get to the modern style of comic storytelling. I mean, there are other things before that are a little more modern, but where it becomes like a superhero thing. It took a while to shake off the style, but
go ahead.
I was just saying, I found it really fast to read. I actually had to stop myself from finishing. Yeah, this is how DC should be for me, but I had to stop myself from reading it all in one sitting. I spaced it out over three nights just to sort of give myself time to absorb it, but I could have definitely flown through the whole thing. I mean,
Yeah.
I've read this story 100 times, but I hadn't read it in probably 25 years. So,
Well, I was very
it's more-
aware of the sort of quality of the prose and the time that it was in, and mostly the script. Mostly it's the Len Wein part that I was
Mhm.
like, I need to polish this up a little bit, because there had been discussions on our Discord sort of about whether you can sort of get into the sort of older type of comics, and I know we have before lots of times, and it's fun, and other times it's a little much. Like, I think that because I think the plot was really smart, and so there was a lot of things in there now that you'd be like, that's out of character, but you kind of roll with it because it's the time. Like Batman, I was like, this is a very different Batman. He won't shut up.
It's a much more casual, quippy Batman.
And even like Darkseid was like he kept laughing, and he was like, Darkseid doesn't. He just stands there and is grim. But it was fine for that.
I think he definitely laughed. I mean, I think that's definitely kind of dark. Let's talk. I mean, there's a good shot. I want to put this up on the screen here of him. So I want to talk about Byrne for a minute. So one of the things I love about Byrne is, or looking at this book, is that this is the New Gods. He does such a good Darkseid. And if you look at that Granny Goodness, look how curvy that face is.
No, that's what I was like. Every time they switch to the New Gods or Apocalypse, I was like, oh, he's not even trying to put his stamp on it. He's like, this is what Kirby did, and this is what it looks like. And that sort of craggy rock face that Apocalypse has, and then that sort of squashed frying pan face on Granny Goodness. That part,
so good. And
it's absolutely beautiful.
This is also a time when I was, playing with the Superpowers toys, which were not based on this story, but certainly a lot of the characters were in this book. And so this, look how awesomely squat and thick, for lack of a better word, Darkseid is. I mean, it's just so good. There's a reason why he was like the top guy in the industry, during this period. He's just, first of all, he could do 2 of these books a month.
I was gonna say, first of all, he's very productive. So a friend of mine, there's like a sales axiom is like, you can have a cheap, fast, or good. Pick 2. And a friend of mine, who's a pro writer, had said to me once, he's like, you got to be either fast, really good, or really cool to work with. And I think that history has taught us which 2 John Byrne went with. Really good and really fast. Fast meaning on time, and maybe I speak of legend. I don't know the man, but he's got some stories about him out there.
A lot of one of the things I really remember as a kid, and it was clear rereading, was how disturbed I was at the scene in which the crowd basically stomps Robin into the hospital.
So that's really interesting.
It's a visceral, there's this panel where the mob has, they basically turn on Batman and Robin, who just saved them. And I remember feeling the claustrophobia as a kid, and and then the anger of why they're hurting him. Because he is a kid, even if he's a hero they don't like. These are adults that are stomping on this kid, and it's Jason Todd, so he kind of deserved it. But
I was trying to figure out which one. I was like, I think that's Jason Todd, and I was like,
Jason.
Again?
Yeah.
And then later they sort of come for him again. I was like, this guy had it out for him the whole time. So what was interesting about that is this is probably the first thing that I bumped on in terms of what's happening here. So they're in the mall. And I made a little joke about this on the Instagram. So Batman gets hit in the face with some perfume, and he's out. That takes him out.
And stings.
Okay, that's going.
Stings.
No, he's like, I can't see, I can't fight. But the thing that got me here was that, and I almost thought Gordon was like a plant, because Gordon's like, you can't do any good. Let's go outside. And Batman's like, okay. And he goes and gets in the car. And then a couple of pages later, I was like, wait, what happened to Robin? And I went back to see if they'd resolved it. And then I was like, I guess they're just not. And then later, he's savagely beaten and put in the hospital. I was like, that one was a stretch. I was like,
well, he did say, he said, let my men save him. And I totally get it. Batman wouldn't just leave him to the mob, but he does say, well, my men will get him, and they don't. That's a coloring error in that panel. You see they colored the glove red in the middle. But yeah, he gets Jason Todd again savagely beaten.
I couldn't. I was just Batman's like, all right, you take care of it. I'm like, well, who dropped the ball here? Did Gordon like? First of all, the cops. I don't know. He didn't know what was going on, but I just thought I was like, that's a tough one to swallow. And then they like when they cut back to him, like he's really beaten.
Yeah.
It
was disturbing as a kid to watch this mob of adults just beat on this kid.
How much of this was sort of you experiencing like a reaction? Have you looked at this since then? Like, have you read it?
Oh, sure. I think I have one of the collections, not on my shelf. I've got my shelf collection, and I have my wouldn't fit in the shelf in boxes collection. I think it's in the boxes. But yeah, I loved this as a kid. I love it now as a time capsule into when I thought DC was the best. I mean, I love the early 2000s Jeff Johns DC, but to me, this is the Bronze Age into modern age DC. The 80s DC is the best for me. And I mean, I like the way it was written. I like the calling out everyone, calling out their powers. I think that's essential.
I like all those sort of. No, absolutely. I love those kinds of those tactics, those things. Like everybody says their name when they come on. They talk about it's every kid's first issue. That's how. I mean, if you think about it, how smart were they back then? Because they suckered in young Conor, who could just pick up random issues and be like, okay, I'm on this. I know what it is. And it's great. So then, a couple of old men who know everything about everybody and have shit on their minds, maybe it's a little like, all right, let's get through it. But, in terms of sort of this little masterpiece of drawing, I'm going to go with, like of art from a, top 5, is John Byrne top 5? Like we'll say all-time comic book artists.
Probably. Yeah.
He kind of like superhero art, I'd say.
Yeah, not taking Eisner out of the equation. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, I don't see how it couldn't be.
Kirby, Byrne, Perez, Cook, and then you're fighting over the 5th spot.
Yeah. Anyway, so like all that was there, and I like I said, I thought I liked the way that the people were manipulated, and what's funny is that it was a little like I was like, why are they all buying this so fast? Now, in the past, I'm going to tread lightly here. In the past, I would have said
more unbelievable.
Yeah, I was like, it's weird that everyone would turn on them, and then I didn't quite understand that the Glorious Godfrey had like a power on them, and so when he went away, it went away, and I was like, all right, that's a little easier to swallow. However, having lived in the world I've lived in for the last years, I was like, yeah, I buy that. They would just turn on everybody because a demagogue came out and said it. Like I was buying that. It's just that's what they did,
right?
The
only thing would have been the speed of it, but yeah, I mean, he certainly. But I think part of it is that he just amplified distrust that was already kind of there. That makes it sort of darker story than it appears on the surface.
I'll tell you, you could take almost this exact plot and modern it up a little with the script today, and it would work.
Yeah, oh, totally. And I think that's why they kind of have done that. The people turn on the heroes thing fairly regularly.
Yeah.
And that was basically what Civil War was in a way. And, there's others that I can't think off the top of my head, but it's fairly, but I think you could take this sort of plot of Darkseid decides he's going to weaken the Earth by, destroying faith in the heroes. And you could do that now in a much darker way.
It's interesting too, because Darkseid, when he shows up now, is sort of just an entity that shows up, and everyone's going to just send hordes into Earth to try to take whatever it is. But here, like he had a tactic, and it was kind of like we're going to go sideways around it instead of straight at it. Right. And I thought that was different. I mean, Darkseid's just like this thing that exists now. There's not really a lot in terms of tactics, and I'm going to tie.
They really still haven't used them enough. I mean, we have. No. He shows up. He showed up in the All In thing, and he basically just was like a looming presence. But him being the sort of master, villain in the DC universe really hasn't been used enough in modern comics. And as part of this was that he had like a bet going with the Phantom Stranger that he could do this. Phantom Stranger was like, you can't do this. You can't. They're too heroic. So that I like that kind of Greek chorus aspect of them talking about what was happening throughout the series. I always liked the Phantom Stranger and his 70s medallion. And He's one of my and turtleneck.
Why was he there? Did he just show up? Like
he just shows up. He shows up where needed.
Okay.
He's like the Watcher. He's a cosmic. He's one of the cosmic, like the 5 cosmic beings of the DC universe. Like Darkseid couldn't hurt him, so he just shows up to be like, "You're not gonna do this. You're gonna fail." Look at my 70s turtleneck and medallion, my 40s fedora. But yeah, I mean, it's a very it even though no one punches Darkseid, Calabac doesn't show up, but it's still, I just love these stories in which the new gods are involved and Apocalypse is the villain, because they just feel so they feel like there's real trouble for the heroes when that happens. When it's like, we always know the hero will always win, but when they, when Darkseid shows up, there's always a peril to the story that doesn't happen with just a regular hero and villain fight. So one of the things this story also did was it ended the Detroit era of the Justice League, which we saw them briefly here. They this was what the Justice League was at the time of the story. It was not the first string. It was Vibe and Elongated Man, Vixen, Martian Manhunter, Gypsy, Steel, and Firestorm. And so this story ended that team. It happened in the crossover issues with the Justice League. Vibe got killed. Gypsy almost got killed. The team disbanded. Only John was left. And that leads exactly into the Justice League International book. The first scene of that book where John walks in and deletes all their photos from the roster very solemnly. And that was one of the things that happened. Cosmic Boy is here in this image. He's here. He's like here and gone. He's in this issue. He's like never seen again in the story.
You're right. He was
visiting.
He was a tourist.
He was a tourist from the 30th century and gets pulled into this story and then is just gone. There was a Cosmic Boy miniseries that all 4 issues were tie-ins, so that his story goes over there. But in the main book, he's never seen again. Which I thought was pretty funny. But it did a lot of house cleaning and setting up, and the very last scene of the book is the new Justice League forming. Dr. Fate turns out to be the guy who reforms the team, asks everyone to join, and one woman basically ghosts them. Flash says, "No, I'm too busy trying to figure out who I am." Changeling says, "No, I'm on the Titans." Superman's like, "Oh, I'll be there if you need it, but I'm not gonna join." But you get like Batman, John Jones, Guy Gardner, Black Canary, Captain Marvel very briefly on the team, but he leaves almost immediately. Blue Beetle, and then they get joined by Mr. Miracle, and then from there that more people join. But that team sort of ends with this book. Very different tone, though.
John Jones was a very different John Jones in this. Like, he was just out front Superman style.
I loved it. Yeah. I love him, and they still haven't really used him really right since the New 52. So it's been like 15 years since he's really been the John Jones of memory. But yeah, I mean, if anything else, just the peak Byrne doing the whole DC universe is just something to behold in the book. I just, it was so much fun looking at these pages. And then there was we didn't really mention it. I'm not really a huge fan of them in general, but the Suicide Squad, the concept of the Suicide Squad is introduced here in this book of the bad guy, Death Squad kind of the team will do the mission that might get you killed is introduced here. And then the book that came out of it is very legendary in DC lore, the John Ostrander Suicide Squad book. But I never read it, and I don't really care for the concept all that much, so it wasn't really a thing for me as a kid. But that was
it's interesting though that like this form of it was really what it is now. I mean, it's definitely like, is this the first Suicide Squad? Basically?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Amanda Waller was drawn in a different way than she is now, but I thought it was kind of interesting. It was very like imposing in a sort of different, I'll give you, I was like, is this racist? And I was like, I don't think it is, but I was looking for stuff. No, I get it. I was just looking at like at the time of like when this was coming out, what was being put in there, but I thought was really interesting. I think it's Rick Flag at one point said like, "Are you out of your cotton picking mind?" And I was like, "Ooh, are they gonna get away with that?" And they flip and just like, "You ever say that again?" And I was like, "Okay, good. So we're doing that." But when I first saw cotton picking, I was like, "Oh no,
yeah,
the cultural anachronism coming in."
Yeah, it was not great. I do want to compliment Byrne's ability to draw real people. Like his Reagan was like, I mean, spot on. Reagan's the president here. He was the president, and even though in DC the tendency usually is to have a fictional president, he was. I mean, you see Reagan, you see Bush, you see whoever those two guys on the left are. I mean, his Reagan is fucking. It's like it's not. It doesn't look like a trace. It just looks like a drawing of Reagan. It's really.
He does end up with red hair later for some reason.
The coloring changes. Yeah, the coloring changes to brown, giving him brown hair, which is not accurate. But
and you could read it in the little cartoon voice that we've substituted for his actual voice now.
And this is interesting because it is fairly similar to the dynamic of The Dark Knight Returns, right? Of Superman being not a government agent, but the only one who really is allowed into the White House to discuss what's going on with the president, which was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we mentioned earlier, this is sort of the first wide appearance of Wonder Woman. For some reason, they gave her a silver belt, which is weird, but she appears, she smashes some stuff, and then she goes some. It's all Karen Berger would allow. But yeah, I mean, this was just really fun. I know I totally understand what you're saying, but to me it works because this was how I was reading comics back then. But the story's pretty fast. I mean, it's not in these 6 issues. There's a lot happens, but also moves very quickly in terms of the overall story. Maybe not the pacing of the reading itself, but they get Glorious Godfrey turns the people against them. They sort of come together, this ragtag team. These of the heroes in the story, they end up defeating Glorious Godfrey and turning off his mind control. The kids help. The kids who talk way too much like adults help turn their parents back. It helps that Glorious Godfrey slaps one of the kids in front of everyone. And that helps the kid, but it helps.
That was just a bad choice for a guy who's so good at sort of manipulating everything. Yeah. I mean, this is going to be the bad guy's fatal flaw, but didn't just he took it backhanded walloped a child in front of a large group, and I was like, that's the way. I mean, it's the same thing. Everything is heightened. Everything is more than it sort of would be, and you kind of have to remember that as we've read comics for the last 30 years that have been really all more trying to make them more real or whatever. But back then, it was about amping up everything. And I think it does take an adjustment. It's really interesting because Black Canary in this, she's in her 80s workout uniform. And I was like, that's really interesting that they, at this time, took her out of the fishnets and the corset or whatever. And then at the same time, then Wonder Woman shows up and she has to actually be stop ogling me. And I was like, well, look at you, sir. And
I like how Black Canary's costume kind of gives her shoulder pads with that design element, not without it giving her shoulder pads, but the sort of elements that fly out or create that look. Look how much, I mean, I know Byrne has a face, right? A lot of artists have a face. And he's got the Byrne nose, Superman's mouth, and Captain Marvel's mouth here are almost exactly the same. But look how much character is in Guy Gardner in the drawing. He's not like anyone.
No, and
he's not like anyone else draws Guy Gardner. Guy Gardner here and Guy Gardner in that Kevin McGuire draws are not at all the same. He has so much character in his face.
He's full on, and throughout the entire thing, it's consistent too. It's not like this is a weird drawing of him. He looks like a goblin almost. Yeah. And they're fully committed to the haircut. If it's true, because if you look at Beast Boy and Superman, that's pretty much the same face. He gave Captain Marvel the squint and sort of changed the shapes. It was good, but no, you're right. Guy really stood out.
Blue Beetle has a skinnier face than the rest, but Guy's just a completely different character. He even looks older than them. He looks like he's almost in his 50s.
He's like an unpleasant version of a Hawkeye at the time. Because it's very much these guys don't think I'm good enough. I'll show. He's got the biggest chip on his shoulder in the world, but he's also not charming at all. He's completely overbearing.
In case anyone who's younger than us thinks this to be unrealistic, my best friend growing up had Guy Gardner's exact haircut.
A lot of kids did
for at least 5 years during this time. So this was how some people were wearing their hair at the time.
I will tell you, I don't remember adults having that haircut.
No, just kids.
Right.
Just kids.
But you can understand why they would then put it it's weird though. They took the kid haircut and they put it on the most reprehensible character they could, a good guy at least, that they could think of.
Right. So
Has a
what's
bad
interesting to
haircut.
me is like this is
And Billy Bob Thornton in the first season of Fargo, I think, had that haircut.
did he? I
Yeah,
want to rewatch that one.
remember he was the dentist. God, that's just
Good.
sorry.
No, I think stealthily this is we talked about it. This is like a relaunch of the Justice League, but it's also sort of saying like this is the core of the DC universe right now. Is these characters and this is it's important to know them. And that's sort of what comes out of this miniseries, which sometimes an event won't have that kind of import. It'll just be a big story. But this is like you need to read this book to know what's important to DC and who's important to DC universe, and it's these characters.
What I think
What's one of
stood
them?
out to me was that, like I said, I'd never really heard of it or knew about it,
Yeah.
and like it's a an all-star lineup, but at the same time, like I was like, it's such a big story. I would think I would know. How do I not know this?
Because it came out right after Crisis,
Mhm.
and everyone just starts talking about
Overshadowed.
Crisis. Yeah, overshadowed. Man of Steel overshadows it, and all the books that were coming out at the time overshadow it.
Mhm.
But this also kicked off the DC doing a major event every year. So then the next summer they did Millennium, which I was basically there every week for. And then they did Armageddon 2001 in 1991. And so that became the summertime event. Cadence came out of this as well. Which basically goes all the way up to, Infinite Crisis or so, and then Final Crisis and stops. But it was fun. It was fun to read big stories like this and see characters you wouldn't necessarily know much about. I mean, I remember being a huge fan of Dr. Fate in this time for no other reason. I just liked the design of him.
Like for him, it's always been that. Like I really have never sort of gotten the character or really particularly attracted to it, but the costume is fantastic. I'd also never seen the thing. This is how they took care of. So who stole the mask off it and put him on it? Was it Godfrey?
One of the parademons pulled it off his head and gave it to Godfrey. And
Right,
Godfrey put it on, and that's what ultimately beat him.
And it killed him.
It almost killed him. Yeah,
it seemed like it murdered him, but I was like, "Oh, I've never seen that. Don't wear his stuff. That's a bad call."
And and these characters not exactly as they will later become. Like,
well,
I would never say this out loud, but I'm going to say it out loud. The Justice League book kind of ruined the Blue Beetle. It made him a joke. And
the Giffen DeMatteis,
right. And so here, he's much more, kind of a badass tech guy, really capable, the hero of Chicago. And then the Justice League book turns him into a joke along with Booster, and he has not really shaken that persona since.
I like that he was like, all the cops came and I was like, is he gonna give himself up? And he was like, I got places to be, did some stuff and got out of there. I was like, well, that's ballsy. That was kind of cool. And it's maybe I didn't like put it together there because I was like, oh, this guy's like the nerdy wimp guy who's not really put out, cut out for it.
Because that's what he becomes later, and that's what stuck to him forever after that. But this is like the last gasp of Ted Kord being kind of a cool badass, and then ruined in the best possible way in the Justice League book. This is also a great look at old Billy Batson in a way we don't really see him, and he's really shaken by the idea that he murders someone in the book, which I thought was really
also
good.
He had a talk show.
Yeah, he did. That was his whole thing. He was a radio host.
That was a TV full on studio.
Right. I mean, it's like early when he first came on the scene in the 50s or 40s, whatever the character came out, he was a radio host because that's what was around, and then he became a TV host. Now he's probably a fucking influencer or whatever. The book. I don't read the book, but yeah, I mean, it was a great look into this period of time that just is so great. Wally is not in it a ton, but his whole thing was coming out of Crisis. He was weaker, and I remember at one point he was dying from the use of the powers, and they ended up fixing that up in his book, but he wasn't as fast as
like his deal here was he could only move as fast as the speed of sound, and he gets tired a lot faster.
Yeah,
because he's not tapping into the speed force. And I said, that's interesting.
They took care of that pretty quick.
Yeah,
this is not helpful to us.
Well, it's funny because I assume part of Crisis was to be like, hey, these things are all too overpowered and it's getting out without limitations, and so they gave him these.
Well, that didn't.
No,
I don't. I think it was meant. I think it was mentioned at the end of Crisis that he was basically dying from the powers. That might have been there. I can't remember, but it wasn't. There wasn't a sort of we didn't see the outcome of that until here because this was probably the first time seeing him as Flash because his book hadn't started yet. So this might have been our first look at Wally as Flash outside of Crisis before his solo series began.
It clearly was, yeah, it was new. I like that Beast Boy Garth he's spot on. He's exactly the same now. That character hasn't changed one bit. He's totally consistent with the modern and pre-modern versions of him. Great character, super fun.
Yeah, as you said, Batman was a bit more talkative to the people.
And he was quippy. It's funny because this image back there, that looks like, dark shadowy Batman standing in the back. But maybe like the first savage beating of his third Robin knocked him down a little bit, and then what happens to him, in a couple of years, that really put him over the edge of being the grim Avenger that we know today.
He called like some thugs losers or something. He was like, "You losers need to shut up," and like punched him in the face. It's like, it's just interesting to see the different. I mean, Batman goes through probably the biggest change from pre-Crisis to post. Pre-Dark Knight Returns to post. Pre-Denny O'Neil's Batman to post Denny O'Neil's Batman, and so that really hasn't happened yet.
But it's interesting though because I did, I've read old Batman stuff from the 70s and the 60s, and he tends to fluctuate. Like the 60s was the TV show, but that Neil Adams, sort of era, he's pretty grim. He's not like today, but he's not like this. Right. This one, he was, he's a superhero. There's some prime DC thugs in here. By the way,
Captain Karate Chops one thug says, "Now sleep." Captain Boomerang is the main character here.
Someone said "eep." I don't remember who it was, but it was like something happened, and then there was a word balloon between somebody's legs, and that person jumping around went "eep," and I thought of you, but now I can't find where it is, and I'm sorry.
What were you gonna say about Captain Boomerang?
Captain Boomerang's costume is maybe one of the worst costumes. What is he, like a flight attendant?
Oh, yeah.
I know, but like
the little Aussie hat is not.
Is that an Aussie hat?
I don't know. I assume so.
That doesn't scream. That's a bad look all around. Is he a gay character now? Is that a thing they did to him?
I don't know. I think the last time I even saw him.
I feel like anyway, I might be completely wrong, but I don't know what's going on there. It's very strange.
Do you have any final thoughts on Legends? I mean, I know you sort of gave you at the top, but having read it now as sort of part of DC history,
I think there was a lot to like about it. I'm glad that I read it. I think it's worth just sort of looking through for the art. I think the plotting is very strong. I think the dialogue made it a little difficult. I think it could have, it's not the best. So like that part of it felt very. I just remember I wanted to bring up at the end. Darkseid has the dolls, and he is having the best time with them. At one point in the beginning, like he reaches over and like I don't know if the dolls were there or if he had a machine that sort of spat one out. I was like, he just has some dolls around. That's weird.
He had them in like a line, like hovering.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if that's like a hologram. But
I thought they were holograms.
And he reaches out and he picks them up and says, "Oh, it's a doll." And he breaks one. And the arms fall off.
I mean, like,
who's the cobbler that Darkseid's like, you got to keep abreast of all the heroes, and I want little dolls. I want little dolls I can crush.
I don't think I would have necessarily read this on my own, but I enjoyed experiencing it, and then I enjoyed it speaking about it. Like, it's almost more fun to talk about than it is to read in a way, if that sort of makes sense. But there's plenty to enjoy and appreciate. And it's one of those, like, the more you want to get into comic books, the more you want to understand it. Like these moments in history are interesting, and important. And it is nice to see, when they're starting to do like older comics will sometimes have really interesting and modern and sort of big themes, but they're couched in this sort of, super dramatic and hyper reality.
Well, part of the reason why I wanted to do it is because it has been lost to time.
Yeah,
people just don't talk about it. We had that email on our regular show not too long ago to rank the Crisis events, and I think if you ask people to name all the big DC events, they wouldn't even mention Legends. It just wouldn't happen. That's the Eep.
Yeah, he flies behind Wonder Woman, and he's sorry about the ring light.
And he's stunned by her, and he goes, "Eep." It's great, and it's like the only thing that quells him at all in the whole book. He's like, nah, I'm the best on there. Appreciate me. Ooh. Like she told him to shut up and stop looking at him. He was like, I like you. So he's gonna want to be the one like in the chains. Anyway.
I mean, you've derailed my thought process, but it basically is that, you know, if you ask people, I think, to name the big DC events, I don't know that Legends would come up, only because I think it's been sort of forgotten in the mix between Crisis and the rest of the DC universe kicking off. And I think it's important
Also,
as a historical fact, is like, this is what DC was coming out of Crisis.
Also, though, not a great title.
It's not a great title.
Kinda, it's like, it's not memorable. It seems like, because then they have all like Legends of the DC universe and Legends of the Dark Knight and whatever.
Yep.
So it, like, as a title, I think that helped it disappear.
No, I completely agree. I mean, it's hard even to Google it. Like, I was Googling it to look up the dates that it came out, and like Googling Legends on like Wikipedia, you just can't get it. It's got to. I had to go through like John Ostrander's
right.
page.
I use the creators as the modifier to be able to get to the thing I needed, and like I couldn't find it. Like, just to buy the.
It's not a great title.
Yeah,
but I get what they're going for, but it needed more context, needed a subtitle, it needed something to speak to it. I think if you saw this on the shelf, you might go, "Oh, what the hell is this John Byrne?"
Right.
But you wouldn't know what it meant.
It's a great cover treatment. Like, it's a good, like, all that's good.
Yeah.
But they couldn't have known what the world would turn into. They couldn't.
Yeah, and if you look at the covers, even I can see why. You know, and they're all good covers.
Yeah.
But you know, even issue 1's cover kind of recalls the Crisis on Infinite Earth's first cover, in that it doesn't feature all the heavy hitters. You know, you don't really understand what's going on, but you know, you wouldn't, like, if the first Crisis cover only has like the smaller heroes on it, so you don't really know that this is going to feature everybody.
It's interesting that there was not a like Darkseid didn't show up at the end for like the final battle.
Right, they didn't fight. They defeated him, you know, intellectually.
Yeah. They defeated his people. But he was like, nah, that's cool. I just didn't figure part of humanity. I know more now.
He had the wrong dolls.
He did have the wrong dolls. He needed the classified versions.
So
that would come along later.
How would you? This is interesting. How do you end up rating Legends then?
All right, so we'll say we're going to rate it within the context that it is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to place it all time. I'm going to say 3.75.
Oh, that's interesting. That is higher than I thought you would go.
I'm an enigma.
It's peak Byrne. Karl Kesel on inks. I mean, it is. It'd be hard to rate the book lower because just from the way it looked.
Oh, sure. No, and like, it's not only, it's like peak Byrne at his time, you know. You know, no holds barred on the pages, on the number of characters that he's having to draw. And it's one of those people, like, you know, you accept that George Clooney always kind of plays George Clooney because he's got that quality. That's John Byrne's art. Hey, all these guys have the same face. It's John Byrne's art, though.
And that's, yeah, that's fine.
Someone has to ink him, though.
Karl Kesel. He's a great inker.
Right. Somebody, whoever it is.
Best inkers.
Yes.
Terry Austin, Karl Kesel. Yeah. If I was ranking this as a kid, I would probably give it a 5 stars just because I love it. But I also really enjoyed reading it. The issues you have are not necessarily issues I have, so I'm going to give slightly, 4 1/4.
Okay.
4.25. That's what I think as an adult.
You could advance in Star Search with numbers like that.
So, like you said, I think if you've never read this before and you're kind of interested in DC history or comics history and how things developed, I think it's totally, you can, this is available digitally. I read it digitally, and even I've probably got it somewhere in my closet. I was not going to start pulling those crates out. But I think it's totally worth reading as a piece of history, as a piece of incredible art. Seeing how DC was forming post-crisis, how it would blossom after that into all these new books, You know, this is where it starts. Everyone loves Wally's Flash, right? People who are younger than me, and this is the road to beginning Wally's journey as Flash. This is the beginning of the Justice League International. This is Wonder Woman, the modern age, Superman's modern version. Like, it all sort of happens through, blossoming out of this book, and so it's worth checking out, I think. All right, well, thanks for listening. iFanboy.com is where you can find all of our podcasts. We've got over 1,400 of them. Mostly Josh and I and some special guests will review the week's new comics on our Pick of the Week show. Every Sunday comes out. But we have shows like this. We've got our special edition review shows. We've got our Mediasplode monthly non-comics discussion happening there. All kinds of shows happening on iFanboy.com. And we thank you for checking them out. And we thank you for listening / watching. We'll be back next month. Until then, I'm Conor.
I'm Josh. And I think Conor did a very good job on this show.